Hello, this is Founder Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to be going over two different views of the same session. So on the left, I have a player version, which is actually just me connecting to myself on my local area network. And on the right, I have a campaign set up. This is for GM view. So I'm going to take you through these and kind of give you an idea of how to do this in case you need to troubleshoot or research. So stand by. Okay, so basically what I have is the actual setup for running just a quick check and overview of some things that you might want to wrap your head around or get an idea of what the player sees. So I've already set up a scenario on the right hand side as far as an encounter. I have a character and then they also a pack mule. And on this map here are basically some undead that I set up over here on the top here. These little tokens here. You got a zombie and a couple skeletons. And then down to the south, you have Dorig Rockfist. He's essentially a dwarven cleric. And then over here on the other side of the camp, there is some tents. This is where the mule is. So Dorig is attempting to walk back over here to the camp to join and watch over the content here. He's basically keeping an eye on the camp while the rest of the adventurers are out checking out things and exploring around. Then they're going to come back. So he's kind of charged with keeping an eye on the camp. But while the adventurers, the other parts of the group are away, he runs into problems. There's some undead that actually come out to attack him. So on the left side here is the player view. And what's happening with this is that the players are essentially going to connect to my session. Being that I'm not online, I'm actually joining locally. So down here on the bottom right corner is local host. So how I did this was I already started one instance of Fantasy Grounds, and then you right click on the icon and you launch Fantasy Grounds again, and then you just join as a player essentially, but I'm doing it locally instead of on the cloud. So when that is set up in the beginning when the GM actually starts a session. So that is something that has to be set up first. So the GM needs to set up their session. They need to actually change the settings on their campaign depending on what they're doing. So if the DM wants to host a game locally, he'll set it up, and then players will connect via local host. He can set a password if he wants. It's really probably not necessary in a local network, but it depends on where you're at and what you're doing. But if you want to share your session online with other players, you need to set it up through the cloud, or you can use a direct connect if you're familiar with that. But that requires port forwarding on behalf of the GM for the players. And you also have to understand how it works and how to set up your router and your internet settings and such to accommodate that. The easiest way to connect online is through the cloud, which only facilitates hosting the handshaking, security, the IP address, and all that. The actual game is hosted on the computer. So there's no server backup or anything like that. It's just basically hosting the connections. It's not actually hosting the session itself. So as a player, I'll just pretend like I'm going to join the GM. So I'd have to know either the GM's name or their password and that sort of thing if I'm going to go online. You can join by the GM. You can join by the game by the actual GM's name. You can search for the GM. If you've already connected to that table, you might have a history up here that you can connect with. And then you'll see here down is the lobby. All these little locks mean that these are protected by passwords, but if you want to check out and find your GM, you can do so. And then once you know the credentials, you can highlight and hit start, and it'll probably ask you for a password or whatever the GM has set up. But as far as this is concerned, for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to connect to myself so I can kind of see what's going on the player side. So again, you would type in localhost down on the bottom right corner of the launch screen. And I'm using Windows 11, so I have this set as two panels, but you can set that by mousing over on the square on the top right. I don't remember if Windows 10 does this, but you can essentially set up different panels. I can have 3 if I want, but right now I just have 2. So on the right-hand side is the game master or the host. On the left-hand side is the actual player. So this session's ready to go. I got the encounter ready. Everything's set up on the combat tracker. So the GM side is good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and flip over here to the player side and connect. And if you notice down here at the bottom, the GM will be able to see who's connecting to the table. So I'll kind of move this up so we can read the text. So I'm going to connect to myself by using localhost, which is your local area network. It's not going out to the internet. It's basically staying in your own neck of the woods in cyberspace. So I'm going to go ahead and hit start. It says authorization failed. It's password protected, so that's true. I went ahead and typed in the password for this session. It says acquiring file list, which is normal. It's checking all the updates, the cached images, maps, all that sort of thing, tokens. And it basically goes through and curses through the GM's whatever they're sharing and pulls that into the player view. And one thing you got to remember is if your IP address or your computer is blocked, you might still be able to connect, but the data may not update. So if you're having problems seeing maps and you're not able to control your character and those sort of things, you want to check your antivirus and your firewall to make sure that communication is happening between the player and the DM. So even if you can connect to the DM, sometimes the data that transfers back and forth is blocked, so you'll have to check that. Especially if it's only one player, then it's usually something related to that. And also you could have write permissions blocked, so like nothing can write to your hard drive, those sorts of things. So those are things you want to check to troubleshoot. Now if it's everybody, then likely it's the host having problems with their connection. And also sometimes wireless connections and those sort of things can add to the problems. So here is the actual player view. When I first joined this session, I'm going to go ahead and claim this character. This is Doric. He's already on the combat tracker on the GM side. But I'm going to go ahead and double click on this and to claim the character. And as you can see, it shows that this player has connected, and now that they've claimed a character, it pops up over here on the top left. So one thing to know about Fantasy Grounds is if you come onto a table and there are several characters to choose from, once you select a character from the campaign area or the player area under characters, it's no longer available for the other players to choose. So if you chose this character and you didn't want it, you want to right click and release the character. So that basically gets it off of your queue, but it doesn't actually help the GM so much because the GM has to come in here, and it helps a little bit. And it says right now it's owned by Laren, so I have to come in here, right click, and clear the owner so that way the other players can have access to that player. This is what happens when you have pre-gens and you have like 5 people joining at once. They're going to want to preview the character. So Fantasy Grounds doesn't really have a way to preview characters unless the GM gives you kind of a heads up, or he exports the XML files so that you can view them on your version of Fantasy Grounds. But in this case, if it's a one-shot and you already have pre-gens, you're going to have to manage this as the players come onto your table and select the characters they want. They need to release the ones that they're not going to use, and as the GM, you have to clear the owner. And also as the GM on the right-hand side, if I want to reserve a character for one of my players, I can right-click and I can take ownership. So that means when this player gets on the table, they're not going to be able to claim it. So I'm going to right-click and I'm going to clear the owner. And as you can see, there's no characters available unless I make one. So if you close the window and reopen it, it's going to show this character available. It has to refresh, essentially. So I'm going to open this up. There's the character. I'm double-clicking on it. It's going to open that up, and now I have access to that player. So you can have multiple players, but when you do, you have to learn to switch between them, and it can get a little confusing. So I don't recommend playing more than one character until you get familiar with where everything is and how Fantasy Grounds works. So this is just a tip. You don't have to take my advice if you don't want to, but it's just something that I noticed over time and from using the platform. So on the left-hand side, again, is the player. The right-hand side is the host. So now that I have that, as a player, I want to lay out the table, how I want to view things and how I want to play. So right now, it's kind of set up to where you have this kind of, I guess, you kind of have this limited window because I have the split screen. But I'm going to go ahead and expand this for right now until we get back into the mechanics. So I'll go ahead and expand this. So now we're just in the player view. And one of the things I teach the players or new people to the Fantasy Grounds platform is to set up your desktop. So once you have this set up, it's going to pretty much open in the middle. It's going to look like this when you first open it. So what you're going to want to do is move this a little over to the left or right or wherever you want it to be. And then stretch this down, because when you get to other things like the Actions tab, there's a lot of stuff on here that you might need access to. So that's one thing. If you have a ton of things like I do here, and there's something on here you're not going to use for a while, like this feat, you can actually click on that window pane and collapse it so that you don't need to actually view this right now. So I'm not using any spells right now, so I can collapse those. So it just kind of gives you an idea how to manage this character. The other thing you might want to do is actually resize the chat window, which is important when you're playing, so that it's not in the way, but you still have access to it. So if you right click on the chat window and unlock it, you can move this window around by manipulating the bottom right corner, or you can left click and hold the mouse button and drag this around wherever you want. I usually set it down here. When I say down here, I mean on this bottom left corner. And then I'll shrink it to where it's probably about like this. Don't really need it to be that much bigger, because the chat actually scrolls. So you don't have to constantly move this to see everything. It'll actually scroll, and then you can scroll back up when a lot of text goes by. You can look back. So the next thing is the combat tracker. So this is the next most important thing. This is where a lot of the action happens. This is where you track your initiative order, those sort of things. So you can see I'm stretching this down and kind of making it the same width as the chat window. And also up here, I don't have any control over what goes on or comes off the combat tracker. That's all on the host or the GM view. So the only thing I can really do is size up my character sheet. I can size these windows here. And then the dice here, I can change the color. So if I come up to the dice up here on the top right, there's the dice panel. Since I'm the player, I don't really have access to all these. Even though this is my account, I have all the dice sets. But as a new player, someone who doesn't, I would only have access to these elemental basics, and then the weight, I can actually recolor the dice. So these are individually purchased by the GM and the player. So if you're a player and you have an account, you can buy your own dice if you want. I would recommend getting a base account first, maybe a subscription like the $5 a month thing, and then you can buy stuff for your games. You can actually probably just get like the core rule book so you can build your own characters. Otherwise, you're going to be relying on the GM if you're the player. So this is basically how to set up the dice. You can change the size of the dice. So right now I've just reduced it. I can increase the size. There's all kinds of stuff you can do to customize the dice. I'm going to unlock the dice tray and kind of move it to where it's synchronized with the rest of the windows that I have here. And then if you notice, I have this dice tower on the bottom right. This is a thing that is enabled on the host side. So the GM has to change that in their settings. So if I go to the GM mode over here on the right, and I check out the actual settings and options, this is under game, and it shows the dice tower table, dice tower on. And for right now, chat show GM rolls is on. So that means that if I roll as the GM in this window here on the right, it's going to essentially show the roll live, and it's not going to hide anything. But if I want to use the dice tower and hide the roll, I have to drop it in the dice tower. It still shows that a dice was rolled. It'll show the result sometimes, but in this case it's not, because I have it hidden, so it's not going to show that roll to that player. So that's an option that you can use for gameplay to make it a little bit more immersive and a little less predictable. And it also kind of gives you that kind of suspense and the immersion. So at any rate, this is something that you'll come across as you're playing. So this is the GM view on the right, and again, this is the player view on the left. So I'm going back to the player view, and now I'm going to change the color of my dice. So I don't want the black dice here. I'm going to change it to a different color. So if I click on body, I might want it to be blue, and then you need to hit OK, otherwise it will not take the changes. And then for the text part, I'm going to click on like a yellow color, and then I'm going to hit OK, and that changes the actual color. So you can recolor the dice or use one of these generic ones, like here's the basic earth set, here's the light set, you have the elemental storm set, those sort of things. So these are the things you'll have access to when you're just a player and you haven't purchased any of the dice. So that's just a matter of, you know, how you want to, if you want to invest in it or not. But as a player, generally you just need the demo. So you won't even need anything other than if you want to buy dice, then you got to get an account and all that stuff. So I'm going to close the dice. The next thing I want to do is set up myself for success when I'm playing. So quite often people have this window over here, or they'll have it way over there, or blocking something else. Whenever you open a new window in Fantasy Grounds, it always opens in the center. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my table the way I would normally as a GM and a player. So what I'm going to do is take my initiative roll, which is on my main tab, drag and drop it to the hotkeys, and that allows me access to roll it from there instead of having to come all the way to the main tab just to give access to that. So that's an important thing to know in Fantasy Grounds, is to have that availability to make shortcuts down here at the bottom. The next thing I would shortcut is the actual skills. So you don't need to do all of them, just the ones that you probably use the most. So perception obviously is one of the most sought after and the most common ones. So I'm going to left click and drag the total, and that will give me the perception roll. And if I single click, it will roll in the chat window. Or if the GM calls for a dice tower roll, I can right click on the dice tower, unlock it, and then move it to where it's closer to the dice. So it's more convenient to use it. And then I'll right click and lock it in position so I don't have to worry about it moving. Now when I do that roll, I'm just going to left click, drag and drop it into the dice tower, or I can drop it into the dice tray, or I can single click and it'll all do the same thing, except for the first roll is a hidden roll in the dice tower. So the next step is to actually grab a couple more of these. So I already grabbed perception, so I'll probably want to do medicine. That'd be pretty handy. And maybe one other. So I have perception, medicine. Let's see, there's history, insight, Mason's tools, religion, maybe the religion one. But those are probably the ones I'll use the most. You're going to use all of them eventually, or most of them, except for you don't have control over that. But I just do like the top 2 or 3, and that usually covers most of that. Now I'm going to come down to the Actions tab, which is on the very bottom right of this character sheet. This is where a lot of the magic happens. This is where your attack rolls are and that sort of thing. And on the GM side, I'm going to actually switch back to the side-by-side view. So if I come up here and I go over here, I'm going to mouse over and I'm going to set this panel here. And then this panel is going to be over here on the left. So this is the player on the left and the GM on the right. So this player doesn't have the map up yet. So as the game master, I already have a map set up. I have it down here in the shortcuts. So if I open this up, I want to share this map with my player. To do that, you just right click on the map image itself, and then there's a sharing button, which I will share. And then you can share the record or stop sharing. So in this case, I'm going to share the record. And what that does is it makes it pop up on the player side. So at this point, as a player, you probably likely want to move this so it's not covering everything. I only have that problem now because I have limited space on 2 screens, or on 2 panels. So I'm going to close the GM side temporarily, or at least cover it, and I'll go back to the player's view. And what I'm going to do here is actually move this map over to where it's just up here in the top right corner. If I need more space, I can collapse this panel on the right a little, so that way I can move this over and have a little bit more room. And then just kind of play with this actual bottom right corner to size the frame. So you're going to want to size the window frame according to the orientation of the map and according to your visual needs. And this way it's not in the middle, it's not covered, there's not a bunch of stuff over the top of it. And then if you single click and you scroll in with your mouse wheel, if you have a mouse wheel, this will allow you to adjust the map. You can left click and you can actually click on the map, or you can hold 2 mouse buttons to draw a line if you need to point at something. You can do that, and you can right click, go to pointers, and you can remove that pointer. You can also hold the middle mouse button and left click and drag, or use the mouse key in the center mouse and actually drag the map around. You can use this up here, which is the zoom to fit. This is accessible by unlocking or using this toggle, and then you would just click that and it recenters the map for you. If you use this little compass over here, it's a little harder to control. You can use the arrow keys. If you select the map and you start using the arrow keys, that'll work too. But if you have a token selected or something, it'll move the token instead. So these are just controls that you got to get used to when it comes to maps and images. And this is the same thing for the GM. They have to go through this too. But once you have this in place, you can actually left click and drag this top left corner up here down to the hotkeys. So I'm just doing that by left clicking and dragging this actual shield icon or this little corner piece here. And what that does is it will help me navigate back to this. So if I accidentally close the map or we just start the session, it's going to look kind of like this when I first get here. So in order to access that map quicker, if I double click on the combat tracker on my actual token or portrait, that will bring up the last map that I was on. And then if you you basically bring your character sheet up, and that, or you can come back to the character area if you want, or you can double click on your portrait up here on the top left. That'll bring up your character sheet. And then if you double click on the right hand side where the token is, it'll actually bring up the map that you were last on. So there's different ways to get back to the map, but I wanted you to see the different avenues of going through that. Or again, you can use a shortcut down below. That's really helpful, especially when you're new and you don't know where everything is. That's a helpful tip. So now that the map is up, the combat tracker, I'm on it. I can see some bad guys. I can see the mule who's over here on the other side of the camp. So this is because the DM has chose to show these tokens to me so that I can see what's going on, or they're in range of my vision. So this way, there's no element of surprise in this case. And as the player, if I actually click on the token and move around, I'll be able to do that. So what I'm doing now is telling the GM I want to move forward. So if it was my turn on the combat tracker, the GM would accommodate. So I'm going to go back to the GM view and actually expand this so that you can see what's going on. And let me make sure I'm in the correct view. Okay, come on. Okay, so let's see what we got. Okay, so this is the GM view, and I'm going to go back and put the player view back where it was. Okay, so this is the GM view. So I would do the same thing on the Game Master side. I'd have this thing situated to where it's not blocking anything, and I'm able to access it and I can see what's going on. So this player has asked to move to this location. So I have to approve that on the GM side. So if I come up here and I actually go to the GM view, said you have to move this all into place, kind of like the player did. And then I'm going to right click and go to view. And this is another way you can recenter the map. So as you can see that this is going to create a waypoint and an approval. So the waypoint can be moved if the player needed to go around something. And then as far as approving goes, I just hit the green check. Now, if this player is going to try to move through a wall, or in this case, this is water. This water, I've already determined as the GM, is only maybe about anywhere from maybe 5 to 10 feet. So this darker area in here is a lot deeper, but this is kind of shallower. This is like 5 feet. So only these little pockets of darker areas are deeper. So what I'm going to tell the dwarf is that, yeah, you can move there. So I approve the movement. He moves to that location. And then I'm going to go back to the panel mode so you can see what's going on both sides. So on this one, this is showing the movement, and then here's the on the player side, here's their token. So this is just approving movement. So this is just the player asked if they can move forward. I'm going to assume it's their turn, and we're in round 1. So he moved, and now he wants to cast a spell. So on the player side, he's going to announce that, and then I'm going to bring up his character sheet. And on his character sheet, he says he wants to cast a spell. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and say, okay, this is the Bless spell, so he's going to cast Blessed on himself. So all he has to do is drag this little icon either to the combat tracker or to his token on the map. You can do that. And what that does is it applies the effect. The other thing that this person should probably do is under their race traits and those sort of things, they want to enable those so that they can take advantage of being a dwarf and that they have some racial ability. So under dwarf, he has this effect, this kind of this resilience or resist poison. And these are things that help him make saving throw, reduce damage. These are also passive abilities, so that should be on at all times. So this is just a way to apply that, and you can leave that effect on. So essentially I have the Bless spell on, and then I have the Dwarven Resilience active, because that should be on at all times. So that's something I would want to start to begin with. And as the player, I want to check that I used a first level spell. And that is basically my turn. So I already have the benefit of the Bless on me right now. So the next step is the GM will move the turn complete, or in this case, the player. So I want to go ahead and, as the player, which is on the right-hand side, I believe, or the left-hand side, I'm going to go ahead and pass the turn. Nope, that's the GM side. So on the player side, I'll go ahead and hit that. So I want to reverse these because this will get confusing. So GM side, player side. There we go. Because I don't want this to get too, because I have the overlay set up a certain. So that's that, and then we have this. Okay. So on this side is the player side. They don't have any way to advance the turn or anything. The GM can. So on the map, Fantasy Grounds highlight the skeleton number 2. So if you mouse over, skeleton 2 is over here. So I'm going to have him move closer a little bit. I'm going to have him move up to the water's edge. So to emulate the movement with the token lock, you have, as the GM, you have to hold the Alt key. So this will start the process of the trail here, so I can keep track of how far they're moving. So he's going to move here. He can move 30 feet, so maybe he'll move to there. And then I'll go ahead and approve it. And what he's going to do is target Dorig with his short bow. So to target, I'm going to hold down the control key and click on the target. And as you can see, the distance is shown here. And now all I have to do as the game master is double click on the attack roll for the short bow. And you can see it shows on both sides. And that's a hit. So as the player, I'll notice that the skeleton has hit me. So right now I have a spell on that requires concentration. So if I take damage and I don't make that save, this bless effect will go away. So we'll see what happens. So now as the skeleton warrior, I'm going to go ahead and double click on the damage, or because he's already targeted, so I don't even have to drag it onto the token. And it's going to do a little damage. and now it rolled the saving throw, and it failed. So now the effect, the spell that I just cast, has been removed, which sucks for the player. But that's just how things go. So he went ahead and he rolled, and then he did damage. And now I'm going to have him move the last 5 feet of his movement. So I'm just going to move him over 5 feet, and that's the end of his turn. So I'll hit the down arrow. It goes to the mule. The mule is not an active combatant, so I'll pass this. And now the zombie is going to go. So the zombie is up here in the northern part. I'm going to have him move down. I don't think zombies, they moved like 20 feet. So I'm just going to have him move south, closer to the shoreline. So again, I'm holding down the Alt key, and I'm just going to let go of the Alt key once I started the movement. And this is where I'm ending up, is in this square. So I'll go ahead and approve it. So that doesn't do anything other than approve the movement. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the down arrow, and now it's skeleton number 1. So skeleton number 1 is going to move closer to the edge of the water. So I'm just going to hold down the Alt key again, move him over, and he's going to come over to the water's edge. And he's going to do the same thing. He's going to try to shoot Dorig, who's kind of wading through the water to get over to the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down the control key, click on my target, which like the other one did, and then I'm going to double click on the short bow attack because this guy's targeted already. And we'll see if it hits. Oh yeah, so 19 does hit, and now I'm just going to double click for the damage. And so Dorig took quite a bit of damage there. So overall, he's taken 4 wounds, and he's at he's doing okay, but you know, he got hurt. And now that the skeleton's turn is over, I don't think I want to move him anymore. So if I do, I'll move him 5 feet over this way and then pass the turn. So now the turn goes back to this player. So as the player on the left-hand side, I have to decide what I want to do. So I'll bring the map forward, take a look at what's going on with the map, and then go from there. So I'm left-clicking and dragging the map so I can see it better. So left-click with the middle mouse, and then letting go. So now I have a token. I have to decide what I want to do. Kind of a sitting duck out here, and I can only move like half my movement rate because I'm in like 5 feet of water. So I'm going to tell the GM I'm going to try to make it to the zombie and swing at him. So we'll see what happens. So I'm going to hold down the, as the GM, I'd have to hold that down, but as a player, I can just move. So 15 feet is fair enough. I'll give him that. He can just make it. I'll go ahead and grant it to him. He has 25 movement. He only loses 10 feet for difficult terrain. So go ahead and move. Go ahead and approve that on the GM side. So that allows him to move into position. And now as the player, I'm going to start executing my attacks. So on the combat tracker, or in this case, if I double click on my sheet here, that brings a sheet up to the top. I'm going to go ahead and use, I guess I'm going to do a melee attack. So you have a choice here. He's got a +1 Warhammer. He's using it single-handedly. However, if you want to use it 2 hands, in this case, he's actually using a shield. So I have an effect down here called shield drop. So if he wants to do more damage, I should remove the shield bonus. So you do that by either creating an effect here, or you go in your inventory and you disable it here. I think it's easier just to cancel the bonus out with an effect. So if I was going to do that, I would enable this button. That just cancels out my bonus for my armor class temporarily until I use the hammer as 2-handed again. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it as single hand. It does 1d8 + 3 if I hit. So I'm going to left click and drag this damage to the token on the map. Or I can do it in the combat tracker as well. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I'm going to take the damage dice, left click and drag, and drop it on top of the zombie. So just left click and drag, and here's the zombie, and that's the attack roll. So he missed. Oh, actually he hit, barely. It was a 4, but with all his bonuses, he got a 9. So that barely hits the zombie. And now I'm going to apply the damage. So I just left click and drag the damage on top of the zombie. and it will calculate all the bonuses in. So the zombie is wounded, so it took 8 points of damage. So on the GM side, I can see this more. So the zombie has 8 points of damage, but over here on the player side, it shows wounded. So there's kind of a limited view on the player side, so it doesn't give away everything. So now that that's happened, Dorog is just kind of a sitting duck. So I'm going to pass my turn, and now the GM is going to take over the combat with his own. Going to essentially take this, and number 2 is going to shoot at Dorog from just close range. So since I have Dorog already targeted, all I have to do is double click on the short bow. The player can see the attack, but it missed. So thank God for that. So the skeleton archer is just going to quietly notch his arrow. So he's going to pull out another arrow to make his next attack. He's going to stay put. So that's basically the end of his turn. And now the mule. So the mule hears all this stuff going on. He's not even in the combat right now, but the mule is very protective of his group. So if I want to do that, I need to click on the map, use the middle mouse wheel, and hold down so I can grab this. So here's the mule. So the mule hears the commotion going on, so I'm going to have him run across the water and essentially just kind of get across. So he might be able to make it across there. Let me see how far it is. So he can move 80 feet if I let him dash, but he's going to lose at least 20 feet or so from the water. We'll see. So I'm gonna left click and hold down the Alt key. Since I'm the GM controlling the NPC, I have to hold down the Alt key to emulate the movement. So he's not attacking or anything, and to get across here is 60 feet, and then another 20 feet would get him over here. So I'll say he can move 60 feet, which will calculate for the movement through the water. So that's his turn, essentially. So he moves across, and he's going to kind of investigate. He hears the clanging and the fighting. So the mule is actually more curious than anything else, but he's also protective of his group. So we'll see what happens with that. So on the player side, as a GM, I tell the player that you can hear splashing coming from your right. You look across, and you see this mule like checking out across the water. It ran over to the other side, so you're not sure what it's doing, but it looks like it's heading this direction. So you know who the mule is. It's just the fact that it must have broke its rope, because it was actually tied to a large stone. So maybe it got mad and broke free or chewed the rope or something. So the mule, I'm going to pass its turn as the GM. And now back to the zombie. So the zombie is still engaged with Dorog. So that's right here in the combat. So all I have to do is drag and drop the attack. So the zombie does a slam attack on Dorog. So I'm going to left click and drag and drop this onto Dorog's token. And it will execute the attack roll. In this case, he missed. So Dorog just kind of uses a shield and steps aside. And he's able to either deflect or kind of roll and get through those slam attacks. So that's the zombie's turn. It kind of, you know how zombies are. They don't really do much, but it just kind of moans in agony. The skeleton number 1, the one that was up here. Let's see, where did he go? Skeleton number 1, where are you? Okay, he's up here. So he has a clean line of sight. So I'm just going to have him double click and do the short bow attack. So this time he misses. So he notches his arrow. He kind of shoots past this broken pillar and into Dorog, but it goes right over his shoulder and bounces harmlessly off one of the walls to the south. So it's really a big miss. Dorog did see it coming in his direction, but it was way off target, so he wasn't too worried about it. He's kind of got his mind on the zombie. So I'm going to hit the down arrow as the GM to pass the turn. And now it's back up to Dorog Rockfist. So it's Dorog's turn, so I gotta do something because this is not looking too great. So I'm gonna cast the spiritual weapon because that's gonna help me get through the battle, and I'm gonna set it right here next to the skeleton. So I'm gonna cast the spell. This is a spiritual weapon. It's first level, I believe, maybe second. Let me check here. Yeah, so it's a level 2 spell slot, so I need to check that off because I'm going to use it. But I'm going to go ahead and cast it. So that's going to be over here on the right. So I don't have a token set up right now. But temporarily, I can right-click as the player. So on the player map, I want to go ahead and move this over. And then I'm going to take a look at placing this spiritual hammer or spiritual weapon. So I right-click, go to pointers, and I'm going to draw a circle. And it's just going to be this circle right here. And then I'm going to move it into place. So you drag from the center. So that's basically going to be my spiritual weapon for now. The GM can decide later if they want to assign a token to it to make it fancier. But in this case, that'll work. And then I have a bonus action. So I cast it. It basically appears next to the skeleton. And as a bonus action, this can be used to attack. So if you look at the spell on the actual character sheet, you'll find that. So if I go back to the character sheet over here on the player side, and I go to the spiritual weapon, open that up, it tells you that it's a bonus action for the casting time, and you can, on your turn, you can move it and repeat the attack against a creature within 5 feet of it. So this is essentially a pretty powerful spell. It allows you to cast the spell and target it and attack. So I'm going to perform an attack roll, and that is done from the spell itself. Another thing that I have on right now are 2 extensions, the spell threat and the melee, the attack thing. So if I actually hover over one of these options, it will show the spell, how far away it is. So this is not part of Fantasy Grounds normally, but I'm going to go ahead and use the spell. So here's the spiritual weapon. And then there's an attack roll on here. So I'm going to take the cast and roll it against the skeleton. And it will, let's see, did it attack? No, I didn't do that right. So I'm going to go take the spiritual weapon, the cast button, which is an attack roll. And then I'm going to drag and drop it onto skeleton number 2. And that was a miss. So now that Dorg is gone, he can still move, but I think he's going to stay put. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the down arrow, turn complete. And now it's skeleton number 2. So he sees this this hammer. If he moves away, he's essentially going to open up. Now, this doesn't get opportunity attack because it's an actual spell. So he can move away, so that's what it's going to do. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and that'll move this up, and then he's going to move over this way because he doesn't want to deal with that. No, he can only move 20 feet. That's right. So he doesn't want to deal with the... actually, I'll move him back here. There we go. So I'll prove that, and he basically kind of moves back, so he doesn't have to deal with that hammer. So he doesn't get an opportunity attack. And then now the actual attack itself, he's going to do a double, basically double click on the attack roll because Dorg's already targeted. So again, he shoots his arrow and he misses. So that's his turn. He's basically not doing so hot on his targeting. And so I'm going to pass the turn as the GM to the mule. So let's see what this mule does. So the mule is over here. And I'm going to make him move his full movement. He's going to be running. Go ahead and hold the control key and move this guy out. So he can move up to 80 feet. So he's going to move up to here. And that's his turn. So he's moved right up to the skeleton. He's going to buck it, essentially. And he's sure-footed, so it's harder for him to be made prone. So they're pretty squat, and they're really sure-footed. Actually, probably better than a horse. But this particular mule or donkey is going after these skeletons. It's pretty funny. So anyways, he's going to pass his turn. He's already moved as far as he can. And now it's the zombie's turn. the zombie again is just going to keep repeating his same attacks as he was before. So I'm going to hold down the middle mouse button, move the map over a little so I can see what I'm doing. There's the token. I'm going to go ahead and have him slam Doric here. So here's the slam attack. Just drag and drop it onto Doric there in the combat tracker. And why is that not registering? Maybe I didn't drop it in the right place. Let me try it again. Oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. Okay, duh. I'm grabbing from the player side instead of the DM side. Okay, let's try that again. So the zombie, if I do so, as I'm going to take the slam attack and drag and drop it onto Doric. There we go. And that's a miss. So he missed a Doric. Doric was able to turn the slam attack aside. So I'm going to hit the down arrow. Now skeleton number 1, who did move a little, he's going to move forward, and then I'm going to have him shoot at Doric. That way he doesn't shoot at his, right at his ally there. And I'm going to go ahead and just go ahead and double click to attack. So the short bow, just double click on that, and it looks like it missed. So Doric's been getting pretty lucky lately. And now it's his Doric's turn. So I'm going to pass my turn as the GM, and it goes to Doric. So Doric is going to take a bonus action and move his spiritual hammer to attack. Maybe he'll free himself up. Now he's going to attack the skeleton. And again, it's on his sheet. So this is also, I believe, a concentration check. Let me double check that. No, it's not. So I'm going to have him take this spiritual hammer and drag and drop it onto the zombie, or in this case, the skeleton. So that's skeleton number 1, I believe. Yeah. So he casts it, and it misses. So the spiritual hammer isn't doing so great. And now Doric has his actual turn. So I'm going to use the Warhammer again. So I'm just going to double click or left click and drag this onto the zombie. And that's the attack roll. And he hits, barely, but he does. And now the damage. So I'm going to left click and drag and drop this onto the zombie. So essentially that's how this goes on either side of the table. So he did 7 points of damage, and now you can see that the zombie's heavily wounded, but on the GM side, it actually tells me the number. So he's got over and almost half his hit points gone, so that's why it's doing. So this was just to kind of give you an idea of the view that you're getting from the player to the GM. And you can connect to yourself and kind of check these things out. The other thing I want to do is some line of sight stuff. So I'm going to close the combat tracker for now and just kind of focus on the map. So what we have are, I'm going to move this map over so we can kind of see both of them. And this way I can explain kind of what's going on. So on the GM side, you have full control of tokens. You don't have to do much. If you want to emulate the movement like the token lock, you can hold the left alt key or the right alt key and drag it, and that creates that little tail there for token movement, so you can see how far they move. And then as far as line of sight goes, on the GM side, you can kind of have a preview of what's going on here by unlocking this. And what you do here is you can disable or enable the player preview. And it's kind of hard to show on this map because there's no ambient light. And also Doric has dark vision. So it's kind of hard to show the difference. But essentially when you're the GM, you have to click on a given token to see the vision type. If you don't, it doesn't change the view that you're going to be required to understand what that player sees. So if you disable it, it's even harder to tell. So my advice, for the sake of argument here, is that to enable the player view, and then when you actually want to see through the eyes of one of these other tokens, whether it be the player or one of these NPCs, you need to click on those to make sure that you're getting the view. So I want to take a look at that donkey wherever he went. Is he not on the map anymore? Maybe he's not visible. But anyway, so the... Oh, he's right here. Okay, so the donkey, if you check that out, it changes views as you click on each token. So they have a different angle, and they'll have a different view of the map. So that's why it's critical as the GM that you need to claim the token that you're looking through. Otherwise, you won't be able to tell who's seeing what. And that's kind of a big disconnect. Because even if you move the combat tracker, it doesn't move the vision. So when you're actually looking at a map or something like that, it doesn't move the vision to that particular token. So for instance, if it's going to the skeleton on the combat tracker, it might change the cursor over to the skeleton. So if I go to the combat tracker and I hit the down arrow, let's see if I can do this. I'm going to expand this more so I can explain it. So this is essentially, it's on the mule, we'll say. So if I hit the down arrow to skeleton 2, it changes where it actually shows the skeleton 2 is highlighted, but it doesn't change the vision. So I need to click on the actual token here. It's kind of hard to tell, but if you look on the outer skirts here, the different views, depending on who you click on. So it really does matter which token you have selected as the GM. As a player, not so much, because you only usually have one token, maybe two. But you do have to switch between them, otherwise you'll get really confused as to whose eyes you're seeing through in regards to the map. So I've seen a lot of people say, oh, the map doesn't work, or something. Well, it's likely that, one, you may not have these activated, or two, there might not be any line of sight, or the tokens may not have any form of vision. So if this entire map was dark and black and there was no lighting in here, then that player would be really hard pressed. So if I turn off the lighting in this place, this is what the dwarf sees, because he has dark vision. But since there are ambient lighting coming from this fungus, it's giving off this artificial light or this bioluminescent light. But I have the fireplace down here, so if I turn off the walls, there's still this fireplace. So if I move Dorig over closer, you can see the combined view of the fire pit and his dark vision. So this is the fireplace over this radius here, or the fire pit. So there is there could be a lot of confusion when it comes to lighting, because you have different layers, and then you also have to be able to access each token or each player, and so you can get an idea. Now, if you turn off the player view, it just kind of gives you a whole overview of the map, and then you can't really tell who's seeing what. It's kind of harder to tell, but if you hit Control P, this will toggle it so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on. So there is a toggle that you can use in either mode. So if I'm going to play in player mode and I'm going to look at Control P, this will show me, the other parts of the map in case I need orientation. So it just depends on your play style and the rule set and what you're doing, but this is essentially where a lot of the confusion lies, is that as the GM, you have to highlight the actual token. Otherwise, you're not going to see the different viewpoints. And then player, you don't have to worry about it as much unless you've got two different players that you're working. Then you have to switch between them. But for the most part, it's not too bad. It just takes some practice. You kind of have to wrap your mind around it. But I just wanted to show what it looks like on both sides of the table. That's why I kind of have this split screen thing going on. And if you're using Windows 11, you can do this a little easier. You can do it with Windows 10, but you have to manually put these things in place. You don't have this hover over and you can assign it. At least I don't remember. You can. But on Windows, I understand it, but I don't know how it works on a Mac. But I know you use the Command key instead of Control a lot of times. So if you're a Mac user, you might be using the Command key. But nonetheless, I think that's all for today. I just wanted to kind of give you an idea, heads up. and show you kind of how you can connect yourself to kind of see how things are going. It gives you a better idea, wrap your mind around what's happening on your table and the players. It's just something that's good to do occasionally. You kind of keep yourself practice and such. I do this every now and then to kind of reintroduce myself to what the player might be seeing. It also checks to see if your map's working right, those sort of things. So anyhow, you guys have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you around the community. I'm also teaching some classes in the next couple weeks. So we got a map tools class, and I think I have a content creation class in May, and I think I have another class, but I don't remember. But anyway, so if you guys haven't already joined Fantasy Grounds Academy, we're just a community that kind of helps people. We inspire and try to help you with it. We're not know-it-alls. We don't know everything, but we know enough to get by, and we'll help you in any way we can. Generally, you can come in and ask questions. We do offer classes. And if you found this video in the future, you can take a look at other videos in our video channel for Fantasy Grounds Academy. We have a website. We have a bunch of social media sites. So